Hello, everybody. So today we're talking about this Richard Bachman book or Stephen King book, however you want to say it, Blaze. So last time we talked about books, we were talking about The Dark Half by Stephen King. This one is Blaze, which is actually by Richard Bachman, which is the pseudonym he wrote under for a number of books. And there's a couple of reasons for that. But first, I want to kind of say something about why I read books and why I'm coming out and talking about books more often in the fiction world. One is social media has taken over a lot of the conversation in this country, and we don't often go out to a library or coffee shop or whatever and talk to people about stuff like we once did. Um, Book clubs have kind of become a thing of the past. They're kind of there. They're not the way they once were. But by and large, people won't talk about these things as often as they should. And as a scientist, one of the things I'm noticing is that a lot of creativity is missing from the people I try to hire into my company or even work with as engineers. They're not terribly creative. The creative ones tend to be people who read, people who play role playing games, people who play a large number of video games where you have to kind of come up with solutions. Those tend to be far more creative folks than people who consume other sources of media, TV, something that's not interactive, something that's very passive. TV, film, where you have all these other people kind of telling you what to think. Books are a little bit different than TV and film in that you have to use your own brain to figure out what it looks like or what is meant by something, and that's a lot different than TV and movies. And it exercises a completely different part of your brain, which is important because your brain is a muscle like anything else, and kind of you have to exercise it. Now, Stephen King, Richard Bachman. Um, for a while, the book industry was such that publishers weren't sure, from in many cases, if unless your name was Isaac Asimov, if you could actually support more than one book a year. Was there consumer interest in two or three or four Stephen King books a year? Now we know the man could put one out a week and people would buy it because he's Stephen King. But back when he first started out, late 70s, early 80s, still his career was not such that you could throw as many out as you wanted and not get the same numbers. So he came up with a pseudonym, and it was a very tightly held secret. And that pseudonym was Richard Bachman. Bachman is kind of like Stephen King without a conscience, if you can imagine that sort of thing. So the books tend to be far more violent. They tend to be far less sort of nuanced in the way they do things. So, like The Running Man, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, was a Richard Bachman book. This particular one, Blaze, came out years after The Secret was out about Richard Bachman being king. It was a very tightly held secret for a while. And Stephen King wrote a forward. Okay, he wrote the whole book, but he wrote a forward for this being cute, and said, "Look, this book had been mostly written prior to the outing of Richard Bachman. It kind of got stuck in a trunk when people used to write things on a typewriter. You'd go have this trunk full of papers, you'd put it in, and apparently this was one of those books. And this one has a bunch of supernatural stuff that goes on, along with a 6'7", 300 pound, not so intelligent person who gets involved in a kidnapping. But like with most Stephen King stuff, there's a very sort of supernatural twist to it. Not all of his stuff is like that because he did write Shawshank Redemption and some others, but this particular one I really liked in a lot of ways. It's a quick read. I really enjoyed it. Bachman is King without the length that he goes to sometimes to kind of try to prove a point. They tend to be much shorter reads because some of Stephen King's can hit 1,000 plus pages. This one does not do that. But if you really like horrific and just kind of vicious things, Richard Bachman is the guy. And it This particular one, I think it's funny that Stephen King tried to use a much earlier picture of himself as the artist picture in it. So if you get the hard copy, you'll see that. Um, wow, mine still has the original receipt in it from when I bought it. Look at that. Uh, I was using it as a bookmark. So uh, I think you'll appreciate it. I think you'll enjoy it. I think if you get the chance to read it, I don't think you'll be disappointed. But there it is, the Richard Bachman Blaze. It's a great book. Check it out today if you haven't. Cannot recommend it highly enough. Supernatural child kidnapping with a twist. It's fantastic stuff.